A multipolar world involves multiple great powers, as the name suggests. The multipolar world of the 20th century lasted from 1900 until 1945, with the emergence of the United States and Soviet Union as the last major world superpowers. This video will be a basic overview of what the multipolar world and World Wars era world experienced. There are many other case studies that could fit into this video and others which could be outliers which I am not mentioning, but feel free to write in the comments any other cases that could improve our understanding of the multipolar phase of the 20th century from a balance of power and hegemony perspective. Now on to the video. Before the start of World War I and after the Napoleonic Wars, the great powers in the multipolar world relatively respected each other's sovereignty within the continent, although there are a few exceptions such as the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 and the Crimean War, as well as others. The powers divided the rest of the world, including other smaller powers, as buffers or areas of influence in a form of balance of power. Examples include the Berlin Conference to divide Africa, the division of China, and of course the Balkan Wars. Powers did wage war with one another in instances such as the Italo-Turkish War of 1911, as the Ottoman Empire was a falling power and Italy was a relatively rising power at the time. Another example with similar conditions was the Spanish-American War, where a rising power defeats a falling and decaying power. World War I was the first continental war in Europe since the Napoleonic Wars, which involved all of the major great powers in a total war with one another. The powers had degrees of experience fighting with one another as well as against one another in various conflicts in the previous century, such as the Crimean War and in the Boxer Rebellion. So it's not like the powers weren't unaware of the force which each other possessed, as well as those that were possessed by their adversaries. The major European powers had additionally seen experience fighting in colonial wars all around the world, such as in the Mahdist Rebellion, Herero Wars, Boer Wars, and more. However, the balance of power remained from the results of these wars, and World War I was ready to shift the balance between the existing great powers. World War I, from a global hegemonic standpoint and balance of power view, strengthened the positions of the British and French while significantly weakening Germany and maintaining America's place as a rising power. This is basic history that pretty much everyone knows, but there's more to it when looking through an international affairs lens. World War I dictated a maintain of the status quo of balance of power despite the removal of four main hegemons. The rise of separatism and of nationalism, as well as the rise of radical ideologies such as communism and fascism after World War I, were a direct result. Anyways, Germany lost all of their colonies and had heavy reparations, making Germany fall as a world power. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire were dissolved and divided up into different states. However, unlike in the pre-World War I era, these states weren't really influenced by competing great powers, as the existing great powers wanted to maintain a status quo of themselves remaining on top and not letting others like Germany and Italy expand. The interwar period saw Eastern Europe have many nationalist and separatist movements with the collapse of the German, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian empires. German paramilitaries and Allied interventions occurred in some cases, but for the most part the major powers were tired of war as World War I had been so destructive. Also, during this time, China was in its warlord period, which can be seen as a metaphor for the entire multipolar system. Other key factors of the interwar multipolar world were ideology and state power. Communism was a radical ideology which was a result of World War I with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 for seizing power. The following Russian Civil War saw many different groups fighting in addition to the Red and White armies. The Allies intervened to support the White Army, various separatist movements, and to extract the Czechoslovak Legion. But pretty much the Allied powers all had competing interests during their interventions and didn't really want to stay there all that much. The Reds won the Civil War and consolidated state power and used various secret polices like the Cheka and NKVD to carry out mass purges throughout the interwar years. Bolshevik internationalism also occurred during the interwar years as various communist movements temporarily seized power in places like in Germany and Eastern Europe. However, interwar Bolshevik internationalism ended with the exile of Trotsky and Stalin's socialism in one-country policy. Yet these actions prompted the interwar Red Scare, where many of the major powers feared a Bolshevik takeover, and a few states had significant movements which turned to the far right as a viable alternative to prevent communism. Fascism seized power in Italy with Mussolini being named prime minister in 1922. Italian conquests began in 1923 with the pacification of Libya through some pretty extreme measures, which ended in 1932. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia and conquered the state in 1936. Afterwards, Italy participated in the Spanish Civil War, sending forces to assist the nationalists from 1936 to 1939. In April of 1939, Italy invaded Albania. The point is that in this multipolar world, Italy was constantly in a state of conquest, which went relatively unchallenged since the fascist regime came to power as the Allies chose to appease their strategies. Additionally, ideologies like fascism require an external enemy or threat in order to appease the population in some way or shape or form to not challenge state power. Japan had also been embroiled in a war with China essentially since 1931, but officially since 1937 with the Marco Polo Bridge incident. Japan had sought to become a major power in the Pacific, with the Japanese Empire rivaling those of Europe, but Japan's policies towards other Asian nations was exceptionally brutal, to say the least. Germany went down a similar path with the annexations of Austria and later Czechoslovakia after sending the Condor Legion to fight for the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War. Again, the Allies decided to combat this through appeasement until Germany had invaded Poland. Another major factor that had gone down during the interwar years with the major powers was mass de-armament and demilitarization, with the exceptions of Germany, Italy, and Japan, as well as, the Soviet Union, because they weren't really invited to all of those disarmament treaties. World War II began with the British and French declarations of war against Nazi Germany after Germany invaded Poland, and the story of everyone else getting involved in the course of World War II. World War II ended with the US and Soviet Union as the dominant powers after the devastation of Europe and Asia, with all of the other powers being too weak from the war. World War II also sparked an end to appeasement in the post-World War II world, with targeted ideologies being spread and suppressed by the two major powers. Additionally, the powers would remain militarized unlike the end of World War I, as the Axis took advantage of all of those disarmament treaties and violated other treaties without many real consequences from the League of Nations before the start of World War II. Now there would be the United Nations being founded. Keep in mind, this was a very basic summary of the World Wars era and multipolar world of the 20th century. Next week I will be covering the bipolar world and Cold War era phases of confrontation, détente, and rapprochement. There are other elements from the multipolar world that I didn't mention and that will be included in that video. It will also focus on the US and Soviet Union as the two main world superpowers that emerged after World War II, and other minor powers that still thought they were world powers and rising powers during the Cold War. I'll be discussing how the bipolar world worked and how proxy wars, post-colonial conflicts, and regime change were enacted by the two superpowers and how they differed by the three main phases of the Cold War. So I'll see you next week if you enjoyed this video, and thank you very much for watching.